To some, this man is one of the great political leaders of the 20th century.
Then don't you think that 2 terms is enough for any man?
To others, he is the very definition of a dictator. Cruel, corrupt, and contemptible.
I have proclaimed martial law.
He was the worst president that ever ruled.
Now, Ferdinand Marcos has been granted one final honor.
Let us be the heroes that my father asked us all to be.
Marcos is no hero!
He was a despot. He was a tyrant. He was a traitor.
Is this the final chapter in the story of President Ferdinand Marcos, or an attempt to rewrite a bloody and corrupt history? November 2016. One of the Asian century's most controversial leaders is given the ultimate honor. 30 years after being toppled from power, President Ferdinand Marcos is buried with full pomp and ceremony in the Philippines' most hallowed ground, the cemetery for the nation's heroes.
We thank President Rodrigo Duterte for his recognition of my father's service to the nation, and to the Filipino people for their continuing support of my father's dream of unity and progress for our country.
Marcos Hitler! Marcos Hitler!
But for many other Filipinos, the burial of Marcos in a hero's cemetery is a betrayal of history.
Marcos does not deserve a hero's burial!
There was once real reason for hope.
Having been elected and proclaimed as President of the Philippines.
January 1966. The dashing young president and his glamorous wife sweep to power on promises of reform and modernization.
Marcos was in many ways, he had an image of entering into the Philippine psyche in the 65 elections as a Kennedy. Marcos was a very young president, and Imelda was a very beautiful wife and adoring little children. And so Marcos had a very positive image in the beginning of his term.
Yes, we have borrowed, but only for purposes of productive enterprise.
He had a long-term development plan. He wanted to build a national infrastructure. He was a very brilliant man. He was very bright.
He ran on the slogan, "This country can be great again." He built more roads, bridges, schools, and more than all the other presidents before him combined.
Marcos lays the foundations for his rise to power during the bloody occupation of the Philippines by the Japanese in World War II. Marcos's exploits as a guerrilla leader were a clever way of gaining national attention for the ambitious young politician. He even had a Hollywood feature film made to celebrate Marcos the war hero.
So in one of his accounts, he single-handedly came across a bunch of Japanese soldiers, and by himself, he wiped them out, and he was able to grab one of the swords of the Japanese in the process. I mean, these were unbelievable accounts.
Maurice Jokno, former head of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, has reviewed the Marcos war record.
What struck me immediately after reading the archives was that even as a soldier, well before he became a politician. Mr. Marcos was already a liar.
Marcos, the self-proclaimed war hero, aims to secure what no previous Filipino politician had ever achieved, a second term as president. In the Philippines, politics is a blood sport, a terrifying mix of violence and money, guns, goons, and gold.
So the old adage used to be guns and goons, military goons or armed goons, and gold. That's what you needed in order to win.
The 1969 election is now considered the most violent and corrupt in Filipino history. Marcos spends more than $50 million of taxpayers' money to buy his way to victory.
He really cleaned out the treasury just to make sure that he would win the election.
Serge Osmena's father fights Marcos in the 1969 election and loses.
Well, you have to buy loyalties to this country if you're in that kind of business, and unfortunately, he was just superb at buying loyalties.
Handing out money that wasn't his to bribe voters was just the start of Marcos's corruption.
It got so bad that 1 month after the elections, we had to devalue our currency, and it caused a lot of hardship among the people.
From the beginning of his second term in office, Marcos's grip on power is challenged. Tens of thousands of students begin to protest against poverty and corruption. All the protesters' anger and frustration focuses on one man.
We were convinced that Marcos was the embodiment of the system that we wanted to overthrow.
Bonifacio Iligan, then a young student, remembers the fear and the excitement on the streets.
I was there. You can say I was a combatant because I was among the multitudes that threw stones and rocks.
The marches were going on almost every day. The cry was death to Marcos.
Marcos's police and army respond with sometimes lethal force.
We didn't know what to do. It was simply a demonstration of our anger. But as that was happening, the soldiers, armed to the teeth, were already in the vicinity and shooting at us again. 4 of us lay dead.
With rioters besieging the presidential palace, Marcos considers his options.
I have been called to save the country.
Marcos actually made a handwritten diary of most of his days as president. And it reflected, of course, his perspective of history, of what was happening around him.
This is the message I deduce from the visions that I see asleep and awake. You are the only person who can do it, said God.
He said that God is telling him that that his mission in life is to stop the communists from ruling this country.
I still feel that my greatest contribution to the country will be saving it from communism. The issue has become this simple and brutal. It is a matter of survival.
Marcos tells the nation that the student protests are being orchestrated by hardcore communist revolutionaries.
He kept on talking about the communists. The communists are taking over, therefore we must declare martial law.
There is only one problem. There aren't that many actual Reds under the bed.
If you study the reports from government, it was virtually impossible for the communists to take over.
The violence begins to escalate. The street disturbances are bad enough, But then Manila is rocked by a series of mysterious bombings. His political opponents soon grow suspicious about the president's astonishing ability to predict where the bombers will strike next.
You know, they're going to bomb such and such a place. The City Hall, Quezon City Hall, Manila City Hall. These were his speeches, and he would talk about this, and it would happen. For heaven's sakes. So how would he know?
Marcos plans to use the growing violence to justify the introduction of martial law, where all normal democratic principles will be suspended and all power will be ceded to the president.
A little more destruction and vandalism and I can do anything.
He has brought honor and dignity.
The final trigger for martial law is a machine gun attack on one of the president's closest aides, Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile.
And then you must remember Enrile, there was this assassination attempt, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back.
On that day, I was with the president, and then the telephone rang. I answered the phone, and it was Defense Secretary Enrile to tell me that he had been ambushed, but that he was okay.
Well, I just remember the firing. My aide was inside the car. He was nearly shot.
94-year-old Senator Enrile now says he had a miraculous escape.
I never expected that something like that would happen. Who would not? My car was riddled with bullets.
Enrile was not in his car. He was in his bodyguard's car. And so his bodyguards started riddling the car with bullets and to ambush him.
That was a put-up job. There was 36 bullet holes, and not a single person was injured, not even a scratch.
14 years later, when Enrile turned against Marcos, he admitted at a press conference that the assassination attempt had indeed been staged.
And he said, oh, that was a hoax. That was just, made up in order to justify the imposition of martial law.
Now Senator Enrile provides what he clearly intends to be his final word on the subject. It was, in fact, a genuine assassination attempt after all.
There was an ambush, but they wanted to project and insinuate that it was actually contrived. But it was not. It was not.
He wrote a book where he said, no, it was a genuine ambush. Nobody believes him.
Out of this cauldron of dubious assassination attempts, mysterious explosions and double dealing, one thing becomes clear. Martial law is coming. And that means Marcos will stay in power. Morning, September 23rd, 1972. Filipinos wake up to a new and disturbing reality.
There was absolutely no media. Everything was quiet. There was no newspapers, no radio, no nothing. So everyone was literally in the dark. And then they put on a video.
I have proclaimed martial law in accordance with the powers vested in the president.
It was of Marcos declaring martial law.
For one purpose alone, and that is to save the republic.
My mother locked me up in my house. She was scared I'd get arrested because there were arrests happening all over the place and they were just waiting for me to get arrested.
The first person arrested under martial law is opposition leader Ninoy Aquino.
Ninoy Aquino was the main political rival of Marcos. In fact, I think Marcos thinks of him as a very formidable opponent. If there are two people who understood each other more than anyone else, it's Marcos and Ninoy.
All potential voices of criticism are silenced. The doors to Parliament are padlocked. State television is restricted to a diet of children's cartoons and repeat transmissions of the fateful proclamation.
Now, the limit has been reached, for we are against the wall.
Those who have been plotting Marcos's downfall are about to enter a new and terrible era.
I was asked the names of my comrades and where they were. I refused to answer the questions. They hit me and they put bullets between my fingers, and if they didn't like the answers to their questions, they squeezed my fingers, and I thought my finger, the bones of my hand could crack. And they applied hot iron to the soles of my feet. One time they took me to the garage. There were many of them. I saw someone applying soap to a stick. They ordered me to put down my trousers and my underwear and try to insert the stick through my penis. I was 23 and I cried. And I was calling out, "Oh God." And they laughed and they said, "Why are you calling God? Aren't you a communist? Communists don't believe in God." It was a humiliation, it was a degradation, it was everything that, that they tried to destroy my morale and my humanity.
Etta Rosales was a 38-year-old teacher when she was arrested for campaigning against Marcos.
I was really scared because I knew, oh boy, this is it. Because they kill you, they torture you, they kill you, or you just disappear. I mean, these things were already happening. I started hearing screams of torture. At first, the first thing that they did was, they abuse, sexual molestation. They tried to remove your clothes, but you're blindfolded. And they'd make comments. It went on. And the worst thing that took place was when, they put a dish rag with water to suffocate you. So I pretended I was dying, so that I just let go. I wasn't resisting. Then the last straw was electric shock. That was terrible. Oh my God, that was terrible. Because they would increase the voltage and they would ask questions and you'd scream and you'd scream and you'd scream and it just went on and on. I'm sure that was just seconds. Because if it had taken more minutes, you'd die, So they knew. But at the end, after the electric shock, I was traumatized. My body was traumatized. I couldn't stop from trembling.
One former colleague of Marcos has little sympathy for those who complain of torture.
When you become a rebel, don't whimper when the government will run after you. You have to face the music. That is why you are a rebel. But the rebels here, they cry.
As word spreads about the abuses under martial law, some opponents of Marcos decide to hit back.
Marcos was evil. He was the epitome of evil.
Doris Nouvel is from a privileged background, but becomes radicalized as a student and was now committed to direct action.
We were already getting information that he had stashed away $10 billion. The country was getting poorer and poorer and poorer. I received a call I was asked to plant a bomb.
Marcos is due to give the opening address at a tourism conference in Manila.
I slipped into the convention center. I had to change seats 3 times because every time I'd sit down, I knew that the person sitting near me would get hurt because even if it was a small bomb, it was a bomb. A bomb is a bomb. But I would always try to move closer to the front because that's where Marcos was going to be.
When Marcos begins to speak, Doris detonates her bomb.
The lights went on in the plenary hall and people all ducked to the floor. And I really looked over like that and I saw Marcos on the floor, but he was covered by all of his security men. And there was a lot of debris floating down from the ceiling. And of course, at that point, I wanted to go, yes, yes, but I didn't. I had no regrets at all about what I did. I should have, to me anyway, I should have killed Marcos earlier.
3 people are badly injured by Doris's bomb. Marcos is not one of them. By the 1980s, the violence moves off the streets and into the shadows, where enemies of the state can be dealt with, often with lethal force.
I was released after 2 years and 2 months in detention. And it was my sister's turn to disappear.
Student Rizalina Iligan takes up arms against the Marcos regime and is then captured by an army unit.
My sister, together with the 2 women in the group, were raped before they were executed.
Rizalina's body, like hundreds of others, was never found. More than 3,000 were killed under martial law. But while his political enemies could be dealt with summarily, Marcos now has 2 much tougher challenges to confront. Years of corruption and patronage by the president and his cronies have left the Filipino economy lurching towards collapse. And Marcos has been secretly diagnosed with terminal kidney failure.
He became ill as early as 1978. He was already sick. He was already going through dialysis. But they kept that to us. I never knew about it.
Can somebody get me a glass of water?
Marcos is also facing a new threat from Ninoy Aquino, his oldest political enemy, who's been living in exile in the United States.
I am going back to the Philippines, and if I have to go back to jail, so be it.
Aquino invites Western camera crews to be there when he returns to challenge Marcos, despite the threat hanging over him.
He'll probably come back after Harvard, and we have enough time to decide then what to do with him.
At first, the mood on the plane is celebratory. But as the plane lands at Manila, the atmosphere changes.
You come back here, we still have the charges against you, and we're going to arrest you the moment you get off the plane.
The television cameras are still recording as Aquino is escorted off the plane by Marcos's forces.
Well, they were kind to him. They didn't arrest him. They murdered him. I speak a dialect that's from southern Philippines, aside from Tagalog. And I heard the words, pusila, pusila, which means shoot him, shoot him. Then you suddenly heard, in 2 or 3 seconds, gunshots. And I know that he was gone. I knew he was gone. I didn't even have to see the body. When I heard the shots and I heard pusila, I said, this guy's gone.
The official story is that a lone gunman shoots Aquino before he too is killed.
And then later on, in subsequent video clips where they showed him lying sprawled on the tarmac, the guy was destined for glory and destined for a horrible death, yeah.
But the killing of his greatest political rival in broad daylight also marks the beginning of the end for President Marcos. On the day of Ninoy Aquino's funeral, Ferdinand Marcos is confronted by a new and frightening alliance of some of the most powerful sections of Filipino society.
The image of such a brazen killing triggered a political crisis in the Philippines. It mobilized the section of the population that hitherto had been apolitical. These were businessmen, housewives.
After that, things started, unraveling with Ninoy Aquino's assassination. I mean, the whole nation just came out.
And they're clamoring for justice for Aquino. And so this broadens the opposition to Marcos. And it spells the end.
The walls are beginning to close in on Marcos. The economy is falling off a cliff after years of mismanagement and corruption.
We were overextended on our loans. We couldn't pay. Marcos was going all over Asia trying to borrow money. Lee Kuan Yew said in his book, I told Marcos, I'm not lending you any more money. We became known as the basket case of Asia.
Marcos and his cronies ultimately steal as much as $10 billion from what was and remains one of Asia's poorest countries. In a place where many barely survive, Imelda Marcos spends untold thousands of dollars on her wardrobe.
Of course, the most obvious were the shoes of Mrs. Marcos. But actually, those shoes were just a metaphor. It wasn't the shoes in themselves, but what they symbolized. That for 14 years, all of this stealing was going on. It was just unbelievable.
Marcos has also been careful over the years to cultivate relationships with successive American presidents. With Ronald and Nancy Reagan, there is a real bond of friendship, demonstrated by this elaborate ceremony to celebrate the Marcos' visit to the White House in 1982.
Nancy and I are personally delighted that you are here. And we say, welcome to the United States, welcome to our national home.
Of course, Imelda was a very charming woman herself, very appealing, very fashionable, very witty, very intelligent in her own respect. And so it was that charm offensive that allowed the Marcoses to cultivate personal relationships with the Reagans.
And the man who is in the White House today certainly is creating a new future for our world.
But now, even Marcos' closest ally is finally beginning to wake up to the fact that all is not well with America's boy. In an attempt to reassure and impress their American friends, Imelda Marcos orders the completion of a multi-million-dollar cultural center to host an international film festival. The Hollywood stars who attend don't realize that beneath their feet, up to 150 workers are thought to have died days earlier when part of the building collapses. The rumor is that Imelda has simply ordered that their bodies be covered in concrete to allow the festival to go ahead. Rumors are also spreading that Marcos is plotting to make Imelda president and so keep hold of the reins of power.
I think she herself has always been interested in power. This was a partnership of people with a shared aspiration for power.
Sick, isolated, and with the economy in dire straits, Marcos still has one last trick up his sleeve.
I am ready to call a snap election.
When he announced the snap elections, he announced it at midnight, and he announced it on American television. So a lot of us are actually thinking that the elections was not made for Filipinos. It was actually a show so that the Americans would still think that he has mandate.
Marcos is confident that he can swing yet another election, particularly because his opponent this time is the politically inexperienced Cory Aquino, widow of the murdered Ninoy.
He made fun of Mrs. Aquino. You know, he said she's a woman, she belongs in the kitchen. But the voters knew differently.
Marcos also assumes that he'll win by relying on his tried and trusted methods of fixing elections.
Well, traditional politics, electoral politics in the Philippines has never been known to be clean. Mr. Marcos' own victory was seen to be, as president, was seen to be the product of cheating. And we wanted to make sure that in the snap elections, the votes would get counted.
Armies of volunteers come out to watch over the counting of votes.
Because he was Ferdinand Marcos, he declared himself the winner of that election. But since the opposition was powerful as well, or influential at that time, Corazon Aquino declared herself president. So there were two presidents-elect at the end of this election.
To add to the madness, both Marcos and Aquino each have themselves inaugurated as president on the same day. Then a new and potentially much more violent element is added to the already volatile mix. Two of President Marcos's closest aides, Police Chief Fidel Ramos and Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile, launch a coup.
Actually, I decided that I have to confront President Marcos openly. Some of my people advised me that, gave me the options. We'll have to either confront him or go out and engage in a guerrilla warfare. I said, guerrilla warfare? He will kill us one by one. We may just as well confront him and take our chances.
They felt like they were being marginalized within the Marcos administration. Remember, everybody thought Ferdinand Marcos was going to die, so everybody was angling for the top position.
The mutineers are quickly surrounded by far superior forces and seem sure to be wiped out.
Marcos wanted to crush that rebellion. He wanted to crush the few hundred people inside those two camps. He wanted to end that rebellion.
Surrounded and fearing for their lives, the mutineers call on the country's most influential religious figure to intervene.
This is Cardinal Sin speaking to the people.
Up to now, the Catholic Church has stayed out of Filipino politics. But now its leader, Cardinal Jamie Sin, issues an appeal for the people to come out in peaceful protest against the Marcos regime and to protect the mutineers.
I am indeed concerned about the situation of Minister Enrile and General Ramos. I am calling our people to support our two good friends.
The protesters stand between the mutineers and Marcos's forces, hour after hour, day after day, singing and praying for peace. The Marcos forces prepare their weapons and wait for their president to order the final assault.
It was difficult to really know what was happening. We would listen to the radio, and that's how we would keep track. There were no mobile phones at that time, so we would keep track of what was going on. It was really tense.
As the tension mounts, Marcos's closest aide, General Ver, is caught on camera urging his president to release the dogs of war.
To wait because there are massing civilians near our troops, and we cannot keep on withdrawing. They asked us to withdraw yesterday. When I talked to Mr. Enrile, he said, you talk to you, we withdraw later.
My order is to disperse.
We cannot withdraw all the time, Mr. President.
Without shooting them. No, hold on. You disperse the crowd without shooting them.
Ver, the chief of staff, Fabian Ver, was insisting that Marcos should authorize him to order the troops to use whatever weapons they had on the rebels, on the mutineers. Marcos said no. Well, and in hindsight, that was probably the best thing he did.
But when the cameras aren't rolling, there is evidence that Marcos still actively considers crushing the People's Revolution.
This was a very brutal man. I mean, this was a man who facilitated extrajudicial killings of 3,000 Filipinos. He wouldn't have thought twice about ordering for a brutal military clampdown had he thought he could get away with it.
As millions of his people continue to demand that he go, Marcos makes a series of increasingly anguished phone calls to the White House, begging to speak directly with President Reagan, saying that he will only agree to stand down if his good friend Ronnie gives him a direct order. But Reagan won't take the call from his old friend and tells his staff to send Marcos the one message he doesn't want to hear.
The Americans said, cut, and cut cleanly. And when they said that to him, he knew that he would not be able to sustain any further heavy-handed treatment of the Filipino people.
Salamat sa inyo lahat, sa inyong tangkilig sa akin sa loob ng 20 taon at ngayon ika-21 taon.
Surrounded by his family and his loyal supporters on the balcony of the presidential palace, but abandoned by his key ally, and with his people risen up against him, Marcos makes one last show of defiance. Hours later, word spreads that the hated dictator has finally fled the country on a US helicopter, flying to exile in Hawaii.
It was a eureka moment. It was an epiphany when I saw all those people out in the streets. We had a front row view.
It was euphoric. We couldn't even believe it. He's gone. He ruled for 20 years, 14 of which was under military and one-man rule. And so, henceforth, the whole direction had to be to ensure that martial law and dictatorship would never be able to come back.
Marcos dies in exile 3 years later, but even from beyond the grave, he continues to influence Filipino politics. November 2016. President Ferdinand Marcos is finally laid to rest in the Philippines' most hallowed ground, the military graveyard for the nation's heroes. His son, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos, gives the graveside oration.
We have waited 27 years to fulfill that wish that he left us with.
The decision has divided the nation. The protesters who stood up to Marcos all those years ago have come back out onto the streets to say history must not be rewritten.
Let not the Marcos family obstruct our right to protect the truth in the history of our people's struggle to fight tyranny in defense of justice.
The burial has been sanctioned by the current and certainly the most controversial president of the Philippines since Marcos, Rodrigo Duterte.
You know, I think Duterte admires Marcos. I think it is in his personality and in his person to secretly admire Marcos.
When the tough ex-cop was running for president, Duterte vowed to shatter the liberal consensus and allow President Marcos a hero's funeral.
Mr. Duterte had said he believed Mr. Marcos was the best president we ever had. If you people don't like that, I will have him buried in the hero cemetery because he's a soldier, period.
Following his downfall, Marcos is claimed to be the most decorated hero of World War II, as portrayed in this Hollywood film that Marcos himself financed, is shown to be bogus.
Well, first it goes back to his character. Towards the end of the war, he concocted that he had won 27 medals in the field of battle. So happened that when the Americans made an investigation into it, they said there was absolutely no basis. And they just said, this guy's a scammer.
We thank all the members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines who have here come to pay their last respects to their former commander-in-chief.
Marcos's original critics have been joined on the streets by a new generation, determined to protest against what they see as a blatant attempt to deny the past.
We have survived martial law. We will survive another attempt at martial law.
It's like an ultimate slap in the face that I could not understand. And I still do not understand how that has happened to this country and why we're back in the streets shouting chants that we were shouting 45 years ago. And it's Marcos, Hitler, dictator, tuta. And we're still shouting that now.
My entire career in the public service.
But one old comrade of the president, even though he did take up arms against him, still supports the decision to allow the burial to go ahead.
It's only fair that he did. They did. Who democratized education in the Philippines? Marcos. Who electrified the entire country? Marcos. Has any one of these people done that?
Those protesting against the rehabilitation of the Marcos legacy insist the nation should not forget the astonishing extent of his corruption.
A lot of people think that those issues are issues that don't impact on them anymore. They don't know, for instance, that the debts that Marcos incurred are debts that, in a sense, they're still trying to pay until now. They don't know that the money that the Marcoses stole is still money that can be returned to them now and that could benefit them immediately.
But despite the protests, the breathtaking corruption, and the documented testimony of torture and killings, President Duterte presses on with the ultimate honor to his predecessor.
We thank President Rodrigo Duterte for his recognition of my father's service to the nation.
Today, the Marcos family say his enemies need to learn to forgive and forget.
In the general scheme of things, Pope Francis declared 2016 as the year of mercy. I think it is time that we be merciful not only to our enemies, but more importantly to ourselves, that we finally find peace.
It was no policy to abuse anyone. If there were abuses, it did not emanate from any instruction of his.
Well, to Bongbong Marcos and his like, acknowledge first that these things did happen, acknowledge that wealth was stolen to the tune of more than $10 billion.
Why is it important to let bygones be bygones? You have to pay for your sins. You have to return the money you stole.
Return the wealth to the Filipino people to whom it rightfully belongs, and then we can talk about moving on.
Hey, can we let bygones be bygones? Where's my goddamn money? And who pays for the lives of all those who were murdered? You've got to face up to it. So don't give me any of that BS that, let's let bygones be bygones. I don't buy that.
Marcos's dream had been that his family would become a political dynasty ruling the Philippines for generations to come.
As my dad said, history is not done with me yet.
Today, Marcos's eldest daughter, Aimee, is state governor of the province where her father began his rise to power all those years ago. His son, Bongbong, came close to winning the vice presidency in 2016 and seems sure to seek high office again. And the current president is even threatening to take a leaf from the Marcos rulebook and bring back martial law.
That's possible. That's possible with the way this guy is behaving right now, for God's sakes. Oh, for God's sakes. That's possible. I mean, he may not have the brilliance of Marcos. Marcos was a brilliant man. This guy is a bit unstable, but he believes in authoritarian rule.
I will declare martial law to preserve my nation, period.
So how should Marcos be remembered?
Marcos was the worst president that ever ruled. He was a despot. He was a tyrant. He was a traitor.
He was a good man, except with one mistake. He loved his family too much, and to that extent he was weak. And I think that I give him the credit for being human.
He began to believe in his own propaganda. This is the danger when you stay there too long and you control everything. Then you only listen to what you want to hear. And he believed that. That's dangerous. That's not good for a democracy.
It's for the next generation of Filipinos to decide how Marcos will ultimately be remembered.
I have proclaimed martial law in accordance with the powers vested in the President.
Then don't you think that 2 terms is enough for any man?
For one purpose alone, and that is to save the Republic.